Welcome to Minority Matters. I'm your host, Sylvester Smith. This month we will talk about a very special group of Arkansans, those who live and work every day with a disability. In this discussion, we will learn firsthand what it means to live with a disability, and we will find out about the laws designed to provide support to people with disabilities. Joining me for this discussion are Matt Lyles, who is living with a disability. Matt is blind. Christian Adcock, an advocate for the Disability Rights Center of Arkansas, Inc., and Tom Masseau, Executive Director of the Disability Rights Center of Arkansas, Inc. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us today for this very important topic. As we discussed previously before taping began, the issue of disabilities and those who live with them is something that we all see every day, even when we don't know that we're seeing a person with a disability, it seems. But it's not something that's talked about much in the public sphere. So I really appreciate you for joining us here today for this important discussion. And I think, Tom, I'm going to start with you.
Okay.
Would you describe for our audience basically what it means to have a disability and the legal description of it? Because I think that changes pretty often.
It does. I think one of the things is the term disability is quite broad. And disability, if a person with a person who has a disability means that you have an impairment, if you will, that substantially limits your ability to engage in everyday life. For example, bathing, caring, transportation, work. So all of those factor in when you're looking at the legal term of disability. But more importantly, it covers everything from an individual with cerebral palsy, an individual who's blind or visually impaired, somebody with autism, learning disability, and somebody who has attention deficit disorder, a mental illness. So it covers a wide range of disabilities, essentially.
Now, let's talk a little bit about, I guess, what I would like to describe, just for discussion's sake, as the invisible disabilities.
Yeah.
Because Matt and I actually went to high school together, and when I'd see him walking down the hall with his cane, I knew, well, this is a person with a disability. You know, when I saw another person we went to school with who was in a wheelchair, I knew that was a person with a disability. But it seems that, 20, 25 years ago, we didn't talk in terms of people who have learning disabilities and things of that nature.
Correct.
Why is it important that we consider a person with a learning disability as one with a disability?
Well, I think it's, all disabilities present challenges for that individual, and especially someone with a learning disability and trying to navigate school, navigate work. It is a form of disability for them, and people can't see that. And so a lot of times, especially somebody with a mental illness, somebody with schizophrenia, they take medications for it. And so when they start acting out, or they're in a crisis situation, or somebody who has a learning disability is perceived as them not wanting to learn, that they're being bullheaded, that they're not really taking, they're not looking at the work that they have to do, but it's because of their disability. And that is a huge stigma for people. Somebody with a learning disability is those with mental illness.
Well, Matt, I want to turn this over to you a little bit. Tell us about your experience living with a disability.
Well, I'd like to pick up on what you just mentioned about the cane. One reason you knew that I happened to have a disability is because you saw the white cane. And we often tell other blind people, those who are blind, and even those who are visually impaired, who have functional vision, who say that they can still see some, well, they can, that carrying the white cane is an essential tool because it identifies to the sighted public, here is someone who doesn't necessarily see well or at all. And it's not always obvious. People who have lost their vision later in life for various reasons, say to glaucoma or macular degeneration or retinitis pigmentosa, or one such illness, condition, they may not look, they may not have any of the perceived mannerisms of blindness. They may look like anyone else. And they might walk up to an intersection to cross and appear to be fully aware of themselves, and yet they might be unable to see certain conditions. A person cannot see the color of the light. And so they might cross at a dangerous time. And of course, the drivers will have no understanding that this is someone who should be watched. And so there have been accidents and so forth. And without the white cane, that blind or visually impaired person has A, no legal protection, and B, no physical protection. So the white cane is an essential identity tool, we say. It's also a functional instrument because for some of us it finds impediments in our way. The tapping gives us sonic feedback. We can tell by the sounds bouncing off walls if we're close to a wall line, or if we're close to lampposts and so forth. So the cane is a very important tool for those of us who have vision impairments or blindness.
Now, when did you lose your sight?
I was 4 years old. I was born or developed very soon after I can't say the word, retinoblastoma, which is a certain cancer of the retina of the eyes. And it was detected at a late phase, and to prevent the cancer from spreading throughout my body, it was determined that the eyes would need to be removed. A pretty extreme measure even then. Not nearly as common now because of improvements in treatment and detection. A person with the same condition now might very well not have their eyes removed. They may be cured without that. But in my case, both eyes were removed at the age of 4, and so I've been blind ever since, and I'm now 37.
Now, and I promise you we're gonna spread this conversation around, but you mentioned a person who is vision impaired choosing not to utilize a cane. Why would a person make that decision?
Oh, well, you can just imagine. When a person begins to lose vision, he feels that a great deal of his own sense of self is going. Most directly, the sense of independence, the sense of control. People, to speak the obvious, think in terms of their lives, their independence, as bound up with what they can see and what they assume they must see to do. And so when that capacity begins to fade or fall away completely, the person feels totally undone, you might say. And it's a tremendous psychological trauma. It's a tremendous disruption in life in general. Many times people think life is over, life is over. Well, life is over as they had known it. And so taking up the white cane and identifying directly, actively identifying as someone who is blind or visually impaired can be considered an extreme wrench, a break from the past. And I've heard people say, I don't want to look blind. And I said, bless you, if you don't have the cane, you may look worse than blind. You may look dead. It's not worth, risking your life. And often I said, you'll look far worse than blind. You'll look clueless or worse if you can't see who is nearby or what the light is. Without the cane, the person is lost in limbo. And it's important for a person to adjust, to make that adjustment, and realize this is life now, and I must live accordingly as practically and sensibly as possible. And the white cane is that essential tool. It'd be something like a person who is physically challenged, avoiding a wheelchair for similar reasons, possibly. And of course,
Matt,
the wheelchair is a yes.
I'm gonna interrupt you because I want to make sure that I get Christian involved. But before I transition, I went to college with a friend that I never knew was vision impaired. He walked around campus just like everyone else. He sat in class just like everyone else. And years later, I saw him and I went to say hello, and he walked right by me. And I thought that he was angry with me for some reason. And then I ran into him again, and I said, "Well, why did you walk by me when I saw you a few months ago?" He said, "I didn't see you." I said, "What do you mean you didn't see me? I was right in front of you." He said, "Sylvester, I'm legally blind," and I just had no idea. So it's amazing to me the challenges that people with disability have and overcome and just keep going. And sometimes we often don't even know it. Yeah. But let's talk with you, Christian, about the work that you're doing. Tell the audience about the Disability Rights Center and the services that they provide, and then what you do in general, if you don't mind.
Well, DRC, Disability Rights Center, DRC, we offer several legally based services and also advocacy services for individuals with disabilities. We handle education matters, employment matters, housing, accessibility, a laundry list of other things. Also, as part of our mandate as the P&A for this state, we have authority to go in and monitor institutions for the disabled, such as...
I'm sorry, what's a P&A?
Protection and advocacy.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry about that. But we have, the authority to go in and monitor facilities that, house individuals with disabilities, like your residential care facilities and the human development centers. We're currently working in the Alexander Youth Services Center, going in there and just sort of investigating and making sure that everything's okay.
Now again, and Tom, you feel free to jump in here as
Right.
well, but why does a disability rights advocacy group need to go in and monitor what's going on at Alexander? Aren't these just youthful criminal offenders there?
Well,
go
I'll
ahead.
go ahead and
Yeah.
take that one. You're right. They are there because they commit a crime. But also, when you look at the number of individuals in the prison settings or in the correctional systems, a lot of those individuals have disabilities, and a lot mental health related, learning disabilities, attention deficit disorders. And so, what we found, especially in what we're looking at in the youth detention facilities, is that the behaviors that the youth are exhibiting are as a result of their mental illness, but because they're not identified upon evaluation coming in, they're not getting the treatment that they need. So the behaviors that they keep coming out and out is being perceived as just trying to seek special treatment, if you will. And so we're not really addressing the needs of the individual in there, which is their mental health needs. So yeah, when you look at that, you look at prisons, a large number of individuals in the prison systems have some form of mental illness that's not being addressed. And so that's why we're going into the Alexander Center to ensure that the youth are receiving appropriate services, that they are safe, that they are receiving educational supports, and that everything's running smoothly.
Well, if you can talk about any of this publicly, what have you found? Because there's been a significant amount of discussion in the mainstream media about the issues at Alexander.
Right. Yeah, we've been monitoring now for the last 2.5 weeks, going and talking with the youth, pulling incident reports, and really just getting a better idea of how the corporation operates there and how the state interacts with the corporation. We have staff there today going through and monitoring the facility. But what we're finding now is that there's the number of assaults that have occurred that have been reported in the paper. Our concern is, are they being followed up? So if somebody reports an assault and is there a full investigation with that? Is there a debriefing team with the treatment team coming in and talking as to why that individual escalated? And we're not seeing that happening. Our plan is by the end of this month to issue an interim report highlighting our concerns and what the state can do to improve conditions there as it goes forward and evaluates whether or not they want to continue contracting with the corporation or give it to somebody else or have the state take it over, or do we even need the Alexander Center? It's a large facility that houses 100 individuals. 13 of them are girls, and the girls are housed in a secure facility on campus. So do we really need it? I think that's a question that we need to have and bring everybody to the table to discuss.
Well, back to you, Christian. I interrupted you before you had the opportunity to talk about what you do specifically.
Well, I deal mostly on the client side. I'm an advocate, so I speak with the clients. I deal with a lot of housing issues, accessibility issues, voting rights issues. My role is less adversarial than someone in our legal department, for example. I'll try to, if it's a housing issue, I'll contact the apartment management or the landlord and try to work out some sort of a compromise. See if we can't figure out an accommodation. It's whether the issue is keeping a service animal or having a ramp installed or that sort of thing. So generally I try to fix things in, I guess, the least adversarial confrontational manner possible, and then as it escalates, we have other tools we can use.
Now, what are the obligations of a private citizen, like a private landlord, under the Americans with Disabilities Act to make such accommodations?
Well, it's the Americans with Disabilities Act and also the Fair Housing Act, and they require, if a tenant can show that they have the need for an accommodation, and usually that involves documentation, which generally is it's a letter from a doctor or something like that, and it doesn't have to state the specifics of the disability. It just needs to be some form of documentation saying that the accommodation is necessary. And they will, at that point, the landlord needs to make changes as much as possible. There are limitations to it, obviously. You can't have a pony as a service animal in an apartment, but within reason, the landlord has to make all necessary steps to provide the accommodations.
Well, it's 2014, And most of us like to believe that we are much more elevated and aware society. So do we still have these issues where landlords are discriminating against people with disabilities, or not wanting to rent to them, or not wanting to make these accommodations?
Absolutely. And a large part of that, I think, comes from, you mentioned sort of the less obvious disabilities earlier. And so if you have issues with, individuals with mental health issues, or, just anything that's not, right in your face, there tend to be a lot of pushback on making those accommodations because they think they're trying to, for lack of a better term, get over, or they want to avoid paying the fees for a pet, so they're calling it a support animal and that sort of thing. And so you do get a lot of pushback on that from landlords, as well as just general businesses in the public. There's lots of issues where you have individuals with mental illness and they don't necessarily want to just put it all out there because unfortunately there is still sort of a stigma attached to that. So you have to strike that fine line between a client who, needs a certain accommodation, but at the same time they don't want to just announce their business to everyone in the world. And so that's where you see sort of the landlords or the business owners pushing back and assuming that somebody's just trying to get special treatment, and it's really kind of a shame.
And also, too, I think, you raise a good point. It's 2014, and we're still dealing with some of these issues. And Christian mentioned the access issues and individuals who have service animals who are trying to get into businesses or schools and what have you. And I think it's what it is we need to do, we meaning advocates in the disability community, we need to do a better job educating the general public about those hidden disabilities. The importance of the service animal is not just because you want to take your pet in with you. The service animal, alerts the individual if they're having a seizure or if something's going to happen. So we need to do a better job just educating the public about the access and about service animals and about disabilities in general. So,
sorry to interrupt, but specifically with service animals, the key distinction that most people don't understand, and it's something I didn't really fully grasp until I started doing this work, but it's just that a service animal it's not a pet. It's an accommodation like any other. It would be like telling someone they can't bring their wheelchair into a restaurant, and no one in their right mind would ever think to do that. But if it's a dog that's trained to detect seizures, then, it's a whole nother matter.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the programs and services that are available to people with disabilities. I think that as state and federal budgets get tight, people start looking at things that they should cut, and our audience, they all have state representatives and U.S. Congress people that they can communicate with. What are the services that are available, and why is it important that they continue?
Well, I think one of the services that we hear a lot about from Disability Rights Center of Arkansas is the lack of affordable, accessible housing in the community, and just the opportunity for individuals to live in the community of their choice. There's not a lot of providers out there who can offer the supports that an individual needs to live independently in the community. And so as budgets start getting tighter and tighter and tighter, one of the first things they look at is how much does it cost to have this individual live independently in the community? What supports do they need? And we argue that funnel the money into the community, because you can draw down and get Medicaid dollars, and we don't necessarily need to spend a lot of money to house people in certain settings. So that's one area that is a concern for us as we start reducing the budgets. Another one is education services and supports for as schools begin to look at their budgets this year. What is the first service that is typically cut? It's special education, it's the counselors, it's the therapists, social workers. We need to make sure that for students with disabilities in those settings, that they have the supports that they need to be successful. Because without those professionals, they're just lingering. They become quote behavioral challenges for the teachers. Then they get moved into the alternative learning environment. So educational supports is a huge issue, as well as community supports. And I'll let Matt kind of talk.
Yes, I was going to say, as a blind person who lives downtown Little Rock, I've been very pleasantly surprised at the services that are available, and they're often extremely sensible services, no cost included. I often correspond with staff at Central Arkansas Transit, which you know is the city bus service, not the Lynx Paratransit, but the city bus service itself. And I will contact and ask about specific route information, where a certain route goes, what stops to take. And I've been extremely thankful to some of the staff there who are willing to answer all questions. I think in many cases, if the person with a disability can develop a relationship with the service provider, it can lead not only to much pleasanter experience for both parties, but can pave the way for better relations going forward. And in fact, in certain cases, again with Central Arkansas Transit, I had explained that it would be helpful for those of us who are blind to know where all the stops are on a given route, because the online schedule will mention a few stops, but not all the stops. And so the member of the staff emailed me a comprehensive list of each route's bus stops. And I thought it was Christmas, because I said, now I know exactly where I can get on the bus and off the bus. And these are such simple things that those of you who are sighted would never imagine is important. But the bus drives by about 50 stops, 50 shelters, benches, etc. And unless a blind person knows where those are, it's impossible to plan a route effectively. So those are some things that can easily be done at no cost at all with just a sensitive and informed member of a staff. And that's just one example.
Well, what about a person, Matt and I are from Camden, Arkansas, and I understand that Little Rock has lots of services, but what about a person from where we are? How do they get to work every day? I mean, because one of the things I think about is that it's important for society to do what we can to make sure a person has quality of life and the ability to earn a living if possible, because that reduces the amount of services society has to provide. So what about a person in rural Arkansas?
Well, to speak to that, those who live in South Arkansas are blessed in this regard. There is public transportation available from the Oklahoma state line all the way to the Mississippi River from Little Rock south. There are 3 networks that provide public transportation and or medical services transportation. And the one that serves Camden specifically is Central Arkansas Development Council, and also known in some areas as South Central Arkansas Transit. And they provide a bus system that's equipped with lifts for those who need wheelchairs, and otherwise provides fare-paying transportation for those who need to take some transportation to and from work in Camden, or we're from Camden, in town or to nearby towns. It's a wonderful service. I use it every week, in fact, to commute home to Camden from Little Rock.
Well, Matt, I'm going to interrupt you because we're running short on time, and I have one more thing I want to cover with you. I noticed you're attired today. Your hair is nice and slicked back, and your beard is well manicured. Your clothes match. And this may be a stupid question, but how do you achieve that when you're vision impaired?
And there, I was trying to talk to you about vital services in the community. But as to these simple but very real issues, yes, a person who is blind, I really can only speak to my own situation, those of us who are blind must find some way to know what clothes are, what colors they are, and to learn from others, since we may not know, which colors match and which don't match. And I know in my case, I isolate my wardrobe. Certain colors are in this place and that place and so on. And the only way I know that is from the assistance of someone who's sighted, whether it's a family member or a friend who can tell me, yes, that's gray and that's black and that's navy or khaki. And so it takes a great deal of thought, and it really is, it's one of those inconsequentials that a person it doesn't really matter if we match, but it makes a great deal of difference socially, of course.
Well, thank you, Matt. We're about out of time. We've got a minute left. Tom, I want to turn it over to you for any closing thoughts you may have that the audience needs to know about.
Well, first, thank you for having this this segment. I think is vitally important for all Arkansans to really understand the whole disability concept and the struggles that people with disabilities face. But more importantly, I think what we need to do is really look at the individual with a disability as an individual. that they may be different, but at the end of the day, they can do everything that you or I can do. They just need some supports to do so. So I think we need to look at the individual as an individual and do a better job educating that or communicating that to the state.
Well, thank you, and I want to thank each and every one of you today for your time. For me, the reason that this came about is that I work in downtown Little Rock, and for years there's a young lady that works in downtown Little Rock that literally does not have arms. Mm-hmm. But yet she goes to work every day, and she is living a full life and achieving things. And I don't know her, but she inspires me every time I see her. And I think about Matt and all the things he achieved going to Yale. And I just try to push myself further, because if people who have challenges, who have disabilities, can get up and strive and do things every day, then I can certainly get up and do my part. And I definitely think it's important that we educate our fellow Arkansans so that we can know what we can do to be understanding and to be supportive. So with that, I want to thank the panel again. And I want to thank you, the audience, for watching. This has been an excellent discussion and certainly educational for me. And with that, I'll see you next time.
Great.